Hello and welcome to the first session of the Business Standard Infrastructure Summit. My colleague Ruchika has already apprised you of the impeccable credentials of our guests here. So I'll just start with the meat of the matter. This panel seems to be happening at a very opportune time. We are at that part of the year where everybody, for at least one time in the day, is speaking about infrastructure. Perhaps the accompanying phrases while they speak is not appropriate for this gathering. But it seems to be, especially during monsoons, it seems to be the time when everybody is thinking about infrastructure, everybody is thinking about where this country is headed when it comes to infrastructure. So, and what is happening to our cities. So, I'll start with Jagan. Are our cities falling apart? Is that a correct assessment of the situation?
I think they're reeling under growth. What we are facing is the consequences of not having planned our cities well enough. Not that originally they may not have been planned well. Most of our cities have actually got some fairly well-planned neighborhoods which are legacy of the past. But the kind of spurt of growth that we've seen, especially since 1991, we've been unprepared for that. Our systems, our policies, our regulations, all of it is not fit for purpose for the kind of growth that we are seeing.
Right. So, this begs the question, what exactly are we doing wrong in terms of planning? What exactly needs to be done? So, I would just like to pick your brains in terms of how this planning needs to be done, what are the challenges to planning infrastructure in cities, and then I'll move to broader national infrastructure with the rest of our guests.
Sure, happy to sort of set the stage on that question. Cities are complex entities. They're systems of systems. They're networks, systems, all of it coming together. It's not child's play to actually plan a city. But what is essential is that it's driven by a vision of what we need in the future, and therefore, and that's sort of quintessentially planning is about projecting into the future and then making provisions today so that we can actually accommodate the kind of growth and evolution that is necessary. Evolution especially takes place in terms of technologies. So I could very well say that what we need to now face is the challenge of making technology shifts across the board entirely in all of our infrastructure, all of our service deliveries. And this isn't just about digital technology. If you look at metabolic functions like sanitation, for instance, it's pure science, it's chemistry, physics, all of that being applied. So we need that enormous shift in technologies, and we need to pay for that. And as was said in the inaugural speech, we need to do it based on frugal, homemade innovations. And that's why you need a complete ecosystem to support the kinds of evolutions that we need in our cities. And therefore, we need to make sure that our conversations are diverse enough and have multiple disciplines, multiple skill sets like we are on this panel, all of it sitting together. And that takes quite a bit of doing, especially if the geography of your cities is 8,000 cities spread over the size of a subcontinent.
So I'll come to more on cities later as we move through the session, because the session will focus on all aspects of infrastructure, planning, funding, and actual execution of these projects. So I would like to move this discussion to a broader channel of how do we plan infrastructure. We have a seasoned infrastructure planner, Rahul is here. You have been working in this space for quite a while. With RIDES, you have planned several projects. And just wanted to understand, there seems to be, when it comes to infrastructure planning, sure, we sit here, we have some idea of the sector, we speak about the sector with some depth. But for the larger portion of the people, there seem to be more questions than answers in terms of how infrastructure is planned. We have one of our chief guests here today, Mr. Gadkari, who's been speaking for quite a while on how projects are not planned at an adequate quality. So when it comes to broader infrastructure on the national scale, what has your experience been? What are the challenges in planning and how do we go about it?
So I think, Dhruwaksh, out of the three elements of infrastructure which you said, planning, funding and execution, to my mind, planning is the core. And unfortunately, and we keep reading about quality of DPRs, etc., quality of TFRs, DPRs. And just to give you an idea, say a 500 crore infrastructure project, the DPR would be 1 crore or 1.5 crores. And that's why sometimes it gets the least amount of importance, whereas to my mind, that's the core. And interestingly, how do you choose the entity for doing a DPR? Because as I said, that is the core for the time frame, the cost, the quality of the infrastructure. And I'm sure many of you would know, but just to bring home the specific point, there is a two-packet system by which you tendering system by which you select works tenders. So you have a technical bid and then you have a financial bid. And say 4 people qualify in the technical bid based on their credentials, etc. Then all of them are on the same level. And then the decision is on the L1 on opening of the financial bid. Now, this is okay for a works or an infrastructure construction project for 500 crores. Now, when you're doing selection of an entity for making a DPR, say for 1 crore, this is not the right method. The standard method which is laid down for selection of consultants for DPR is the QCBS method, which is the quality and cost-based selection, where you have a 70-30 or an 80-20 weightage, and you carry forth the score of 70, add the weightage of 30 for the financial bid, and then you give the cumulative score. So that is a very key point, and in spite of extant instructions being reiterated time and again, large number of selection of entities is still being done on the two-packet system. And that's where we lose out, because we think ये तो छोटा सा 1 crore का DPR बनाना है, किसी से भी बनवा लो. That, to my mind, needs a very, very concentrated focus, laying down strictly that you will choose DPR entities only by the QCBS method.
Right. So, currently, how many institutions in the country do you think actually work on selecting, DPR planners on a quality basis?
By rough assessment, it is still about 50-50 or about 55-45. And then you'll ask me a very basic question, that if the extant instructions are there are precedences, and still about 50% are doing by QCBS, why are the rest of the 45 not doing it by the QCBS method? And it's a very simple answer. The answer is that because in the QCBS selection method, you need to take a decision, which is the most difficult thing. So when you're doing a scoring on a 70 based on your, and mind it, the scoring on 70 is not only based on your past credentials, but also the quality of resources that you will deploy for the DPR. So there's a weightage for both, and both add on to become 70. And so, as I said, why don't people want to do it? Because then you have to take a decision. You have to do a scoring, which is difficult. So you have to, take a conscious, proactive step to take a decision. The easiest is to do a simple technical evaluation on a two-packet system where you just check the credentials, the balance sheet, the net worth, etc., and say you're technically qualified.
Right. Kuljit, you also worked on several projects. What has your experience in project planning been like? How do you think we can truly make this better? Rahul brought out a bunch of deficiencies in terms of how we are going about it. Where do you see the way forward in terms of better planning of projects so that we don't see collapses that keep happening?
I think the point that you mentioned is very valid. Rahul has mentioned that there is a need for this QCBS system. And I think you need to figure out why does the government not implement it. And if you can address the root cause why they don't implement it, then you won the game. Because this demand for doing a QCBS is not a new demand. This has been there for the last 20 years actually. People have realized that this flaw exists, but it continues. So why does the government continue with this? And I think the reason why they continue it is because if you're paying somebody some money, a government is paying money to somebody, you run the risk that at a later date somebody can question, hey, you have overpaid. And it becomes very complex from the government's perspective. If they got bids, one of the bidders has given, and the divergence in the bids also is huge in government tenders. And to give you an example, which I recently experienced in a tender, which was QCBS, by the way. In a tender, we were participating, we got 93 marks out of 100, and our bid was 15. There was another entity, and the passing marks were 75, and miraculously everybody got more than 75 in the tender. So then there was the least technically qualified entity got somewhere around close to 80 marks. Their bid was 2. We were at 15 with 93. There was another guy with 2 with lower marks. And it was great outcome from the government. Everybody heaved a sigh of relief. What a great outcome. We are now required to give it to the person quoting a fee of 2. In case it would have been a more different outcome where they were forced to give to the guy having 15, they will be, I can tell you the only way such things go through in the government system that we have observed, if it goes right to the top level, where there is a group of ministers which was set up who can take this decision that yes, we can award something to somebody who's maybe charging us more. So I think the reason why this is happening within the government system is because there is a fear that if you do such a thing, at a later date, you may be questioned that you have led to a loss to the government. So if you can address that no, if you have followed a QCBS system, nobody can question you at a later date on whether the government has overpaid, underpaid, doesn't matter, then people will be encouraged to do that. But as long as they run the risk that they can be questioned at a later date, they are not going to do that, right? So we will continue. The second thing that we have seen is in the government, if you want to still make an effort to improve the system, you should also try to evaluate what has been the historical performance of, this was the plan and this was the actual thing which fructified on the ground, right? That here's what the DPR said, here's what happened. And have a very extensive database of what have been the deviations. So that will also give an indication to the planners that historically, okay, every time we follow this system, we give award of a DPR, we end up with an error range of maybe it's 10%, 20%, whatever is the error range, something will come up. So maybe that will help you to actually recalibrate the system, so to say. But till such time that you don't take this element of fear out of the system, and it's very difficult to do it in the government system. I think very, very difficult to do it. I think then the next best order, everything goes to the group of ministers who are ultimately taking the decision. So the people on the ground can say, hey, we never took this decision, it was someone else. So we move ahead. So it's a very, very difficult, I think, problem to address.
Right. Jagan, I also want to get your quick thoughts. Is the planning problem just what Rahul and Kuljit have spoken about, or does the rot run actually deeper than that?
That's a strong word, rot. But I certainly would say that I think this point about procurement is really crucial. Having said that, I would say that it's actually even more complex than what we have just heard from Rahul and Kuljit. Because at the end of the day, even if a criterion is there for, here's 35 marks weightage for the quality of the team, right? You still make a judgment call, And I have been part of processes at the Ministry of Urban Development where the presiding officer who has to look at the procurement, and I'm on the procurement committee, wanted to break it down to such a granular level that if वो masters है तो उसको 1.5 मिलेगा और अगर PhD है तो 2 मिलेगा. So there is essentially what Kuljit said about both. It's not just fear; it's also lack of confidence. I've been an officer in the government. I had the rank of an additional secretary as the director of the National Institute of Urban Affairs. I had to write notings in files. Essentially, you could even do a sole sourcing if you can provide adequate reasons, and you could record those reasons as the decision maker. I never hesitated to record my decisions, and I'm still out of jail. So, and we were part of large processes. I don't mean to invite trouble. I'm just saying that essentially you cannot escape the application of mind. And one of the reasons why we need more industry, academia collaborations or collaborations across the whole ecosystem is that it helps the officer taking a decision to have a reference. Suppose, take for instance, we've done a lot of work on sanitation, and that's why I mentioned it earlier. Today, an officer can say, hey, we have this either a study or we have a technology developed at the Indian Institute of Technology, and that can become a benchmark for taking this decision, So it's really crucial that we evolve the system. Because if you look at it on paper, the finance manuals put out by the Ministry of Finance are very evolved. They actually talk about value for money, right? You're supposed to achieve value for money. Now that's not a mere choice between procurement systems, and we need to move, given the pressure to achieve the Viksit Bharat goal. And we only have a decade to actually build all the infrastructure now. We need 12 years just to make it function properly and deliver services. Given that pressure, we will have to deploy even more agile methods such as Swiss Challenge. But we are not prepared for being able to do that. And therefore, the Prime Minister's call, I would see as a call for all a 360-degree review of whether we have systems in our organizations, our companies, our institutions, and our government departments which are fit for the purpose that we need to achieve. And that, if we have clarity on that, we may develop the confidence that we need to be able to overcome the fear that Kuljit talked about. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but yeah.
Sure. So many questions, but since we have limited time, I want to move to the funding aspect of it. So there seems to be a lot of hesitation when it comes to infrastructure financing, and there seems to be a lot of confusion in terms of how do we finance projects. I think a large part of your jobs also ends up dealing with that issue. And it has it gotten tougher in the last decade, or do you feel, I want to throw this question to Kuljit first, do you feel that the sector has buried the ghost of the NPA crisis, or are we still living with it? Both in terms of lenders, institutions, and developers.
I think we've buried it. What we have seen is it's rarely difficult to fund a project in India now from a debt perspective. I mean, your project must have done something really, really wrong. Otherwise, generally, I would say 99% of the projects get funded in India. It may be a question of who's funding you. So there is a trend that we have observed in the market. You would say that highway projects, you'll find the banks are very, very keen on funding highway projects. And the reason for that is that under the concession contract, there's a backstop given by NHI to the lenders. And they're very happy with that. NHI is a statutory authority built by a special act of parliament. So we're very happy getting that backstop from NHI. And that gives them a lot of confidence. In renewable energy, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. You have banks, you do have NBFCs, you have foreign banks, and you have specialized institutions like the Power Finance Corporation, or IDEDA, etc., who are also very active in this. So a bit of a mixed bag, but still, you can get funding. Other than these two, we also see that there are sectors like ports or airports where also it's very easy to get funding. I think where you may struggle a bit to get a funding, and that struggle will be not in getting or not getting debt. It is only from the perspective, what are the terms of getting the debt? So let's say the best terms that we see are basically given to hybrid annuity projects in India. So you get the best possible debt terms that you can think of are always earmarked for those projects. I think the worst terms will probably go to emerging sectors. So emerging sectors in the current environment would be something like anything to do with electric vehicle infrastructure or the EV value chain. I think there probably there is not enough evidence and not enough experience on the ground. So probably you'll still get funding, but maybe the terms will not be as good as what you will get for highway assets. But in general, debt has not been a problem as far as India is concerned. I think what we see is more different from the equity perspective, because in equity, what we are seeing is there is a clear-cut behavior as far as foreign investors are concerned. So in India, what we see is if you have greenfield renewable energy projects, you find a lot of foreign investors who are happy to take the construction risk in India and are willing to put in equity. And they're also happy getting into operating assets in renewable energy. But when it comes to highways, we really struggle to find foreign investors who are happy to put in money into highway assets in India. And it's difficult to understand why they don't do it. Maybe the construction period is longer or something like that, but generally there is a reluctance as far as highways is concerned. Similarly, even for ports, airports, they are very happy taking greenfield risk in India. So from an equity perspective, what we see is that it's just the greenfield highways where foreign investment is still difficult to get. Otherwise, in every other sector, I think, whether it's greenfield or operating, you do get foreign investors who are happy to put in the money. Then one more trend that we are seeing now in the market is that there is this new instrument of InvIT which has got created and which is becoming increasingly popular. So InvIT REITs, InvITs for infrastructure, REITs for real estate. There what we are seeing is InvITs are very, very popular for highways, but as yet are not very popular for renewable energy. So somehow developers are not very keen on putting their operating assets into InvITs for renewable energy. We see probably this trend will change in the near future, but right now the market seems to be more focused on InvITs for highway assets than for renewable energy. So equity generally available except for greenfield highway projects where foreign investment is a bit difficult to get.
In the context of that, I just wanted to understand why do you think while there are enough domestic investors, foreign investment, you said from an equity perspective, seems to be a problem. But we see empirically that a number of sectors have not really taken off, infrastructure sectors, when it comes to PPP. So is there sort of information gap that we are seeing in terms of how the sector is behaving when it comes to PPP? And this I'm talking purely about domestic investors.
So see, generally what we've seen is the sectors which are managed by the central government. Typically you have a lot of PPP projects in those sectors. The only exception that we see in that is railways. Somehow railways, despite the best efforts of the government, you don't see a lot of PPP projects coming up from railways as a sector, despite that being under the control of the central government. Where we see a lot of demand for PPP projects, but no flow of PPP projects is one in water. You definitely need a lot of PPP in water, but hardly any, very restricted flow of PPP projects. You need PPP in waste management, but highly restricted flow in that segment also. So anything to do with the local governments, state governments, municipal governments, anything which is within their domain is very, very difficult to get on a PPP basis. That's what we are seeing.
Right.
But central government, barring railways, I think you keep on getting PPP projects from them.
So I also want to throw this question open to both Rahul and Jagan. In terms of where do we see, because private investment seems to be the need of the hour right now. And Kuljit also said that railways is one of the sectors where it has not really happened yet. So first I just wanted to pick your brains on where do you see private investment working out, and is there any genuine scope for, because there seem to be a lot of arguments against monetization and true PPP in railways in terms of how it works out. So do you see PPP working out in certain sectors better, and is railways going to be one of those sectors?
So in general, across sectors, our experience shows, and we are quite certain about it, that there is no shortage of money to invest, and there is no shortage of infrastructure projects to invest. So that's the beauty. You have, whether it's like PSUs like the PFCs, IRFC, REC, in fact, they're all trying to diversify into other areas. They have money to invest, whether it's NBFCs, whether it's the banks. So all are wanting to deploy money. And at one hand, there is so many multi-sectoral metro systems, highways, etc., building. I mean, there are a huge number of infrastructure projects. So again, a very basic question which I ask, and we keep asking ourselves also, and I ask the forum here, why is it that then there is sometimes a gap, and then what you were pointing out also. And I think one of the points, and again I want to throw this open, park a thought in you, is that sometimes there is a lack of being able to do the deep due diligence which is required for a long-term PPP project, which is the risk assessment, the revenue assessments, the policy changes, etc. And to my mind, again, there is that gap there which seems to be a very key element which is required. So for example, you have gold standard credit rating agencies, whether you say the S&Ps, the Moody's, the Fitch, etc. I want to ask the forum, can you name one gold standard world-class agency which can do a complete due diligence for investment in an infrastructure project? So what you will end up doing is, if you are an investor, you will take financial assessment from X, you will take the engineering assessment from Y, you will take the risk assessment and policy assessment from Z. And that somewhere is the gap which I think there is that if we further need to, expedite or improve the quantum of investment, this is a gap which definitely needs to be addressed.
So I also wanted to speak to you about railways. There, with the monetization of railways, you have worked on several railway projects, and the standard argument and the silver bullet seems to be that it's A, a public good, and B, there are operational safety requirements that require the railways to keep several aspects of the infrastructure to themselves. In your assessment, have you have done several projects. Have you found that to be a true test of how PPP will work out in railways?
So you see, world over, railways have experimented, various countries' railways have experimented with various models, and they have evolved over a period of time. So normally, ideally, the core areas, whether it is operation or safety issues, or even in maintenance, the final certification or the final go ahead for the maintained stock or any asset, that normally, by world over experience, normally railways like to keep with themselves. And what is being done, and is definitely being done by Indian Railways also, is trying to look for investments in other areas which is not the core operation or the core maintenance area. So learning from the experience world over, as I said, various railways, many old railway systems have experienced and come back on a mid path, revisited the model. So that is the learning experience which and Indian Railways, as you've seen a lot of recent examples where they are looking at a lot of private investment also.
Right. Jagan, I wanted to ask you, so much of the infrastructure sentiment, building on this theme of PPP, so much of the infrastructure sentiment, despite a push for PPP, despite a push for private investment, so much of the infrastructure sentiment of the country and the sector seems to be decided in February when the budget is announced, which kind of underscores how heavily public sector driven it continues to be, and why there is a lot of difficulty building any momentum for the rest of the year, and we wait for February, then we wait for the next February. So, and despite all the budgetary push that has happened so far in infrastructure, our urban municipal bodies, urban bodies, and our transport authorities continue to be severely underfunded. So, where do you see this problem coming from, and is there what is the way forward when it comes to this?
Well, I think, again, it's related to what Kuljit said. Sovereign guarantee is what everybody relies on. Everybody loves a big grant or a transfer from the central government because it carries that kind of guarantee. And those kinds of PPP projects, the big ticket ones, they seem to be working fine. But the urban infrastructure projects are distributed across the entire territory. They're small. They're also entirely subservient to how the state and the urban local body actually functions financially. And therefore, you're not able to attract the kind of PPP that you want to the urban projects. But having said that, we have done some of those projects, and they stand out like lighthouses. Take the bond issued by Pune more than a decade ago, or around a decade ago, which relied on two things. One was a resolution by the municipal corporation that water charges will be increased every year, right? That was a resolution. And secondly, the ring fencing of the money that comes from the water charges. Two very simple, straightforward administrative financial reforms, right, taken up by the Pune Municipal Corporation. But what it did was to de-risk it, to use Rahul's term. The de-risking was really crucial, because what it tells the private sector player is that, hey, the money is secure, right, and we can rely on it, and the resolution is there. So you're not going to have policy creep. You're not going to have a backstepping from the kind of policies that you've done. And we can see the harmful effects of this on the market in enormous examples, like the metro in Hyderabad, where policy slippages are really severely affecting the continued sustainability of that project and such like. So there are a number of different cases from India where we can analyze what those kinds of problems are, but fundamentally it's about actually just the basic, like Rahul said, the due diligence, right? That due diligence tends to be missing. And it tends to be missing because, one, we often hire the wrong advisors, and secondly, we just rely on somebody else bailing us out. And that's the problem of the sovereign guarantee, right? And which is why the government of India is now very wary of providing sovereign guarantees on projects. They are now not hesitating to refuse large capex investments, such as most recently in the Bhubaneswar metro. The proposal was turned down, right? Now, you wouldn't expect that from an important state and a state capital, but it did happen. And it happens even on the NHAI front. Last year itself, there was not that much capitalization done for highways, because we've kind of maximized already that whole program, the NHDP. But having said that, we now need to shift gear to far more well thought out, well planned, very focused and targeted projects that have the due diligence that takes care of the entire sort of, if I can call it, the value chain embedded in that project, and over a life cycle of the project. That's another big problem, because government has crowded out all private investment. The basic logic which we apply in our own households and families, which is that I have to think about the entire life of the asset that I'm building, such as my house. I don't think about it in public infrastructure, right? I build it, I take 3-4 years, I go over budget, I go over time. If you look at MOSPI's data on the infrastructure projects, it's pretty frightening, actually. Nobody's calculating how much money is just being wasted because of that. But we don't think about it when we spend, public money. Now that's a cultural problem as well, and we need to change that culture. And that will only change if we actually proscribe such kinds of wayward and wasteful practices, whether that's coming from the government or from the private sector.
So there seems to be a consensus that having a lot of thought process behind certain infrastructures, especially when they're perceived as public good, and leaving that due diligence in the hands of the private sector would be detrimental to the overall development, because you want to, you have certain projects, even if they may not financially work out in the favor of private operator, or even for the government in terms of internal rate of returns. So I just wanted to understand, how do you see this sort of balance working out between the silver bullet argument of a public good versus the sort of necessity to de-risk certain projects and make them a valuable offer for a private operator? Where do you draw that line?
It's a tough line to draw. I'm not sure that the two are completely separate, and it's an either or kind of choice. But I do believe that, and speaking now as the architect, which I was trained to be, that the design matters and the foundation matters really, and all that depends on your analysis of the circumstance in which you're developing the project. So I think fundamentally, project preparation is the route where all of the value really gets originated. And we do not have and I know for a fact that even at the highest levels in the central government, they've been wanting to set up project preparation facilities, clearing houses for project evaluation, and it hasn't happened. So we are far from cities being able to do it. But we may be jump-starting that engine a little bit by things like the Urban Challenge Fund, which I believe is truly has the potential of being transformative, because it's no longer about allocation saying, hey, everybody should build toilets, everybody should build, XYZ, one size fits all, but about, okay, bring us your projects. And the government is willing to give you only 25% from the center, 50% has to come through PPP. That's a transformative idea. The finance minister has announced it. They haven't brought out the guidelines yet for the Urban Challenge Fund. But I believe we're always ahead of the curve in terms of really smart ideas coming in from the top. But by the time they hit the ground, they just fizzle out, actually, or malfunction.
Kuljit, I wanted to bring you into this. The idea, since the theme that we have sort of fumbled upon, is that infrastructure projects, there has to be a very clear thought out process in terms of when do we spend, or perhaps even overspend with justification that it's a public good, versus when do we give it to a private operator. Railways, we've heard from Rahul, there seem to be several justifications why certain sectors which are seen as public good would not go for PPP or would not try to bring in private investment. Safety and them being public assets being one of the reasons. Is that also your assessment, or do you feel there is much more scope for PPP in terms of sectors that are even seen as conservative by the rest?
You have a lot of scope for PPP in India for the simple reason that, India, every government is resource constrained. We don't have enough resources. We have so many competing uses of the fund, right? Somebody has to get clean water for free. Somebody has to get housing for free or subsidized. So many requirements or so many uses of the resources are there, and governments don't have enough money. So by default, I think in India what needs to happen is that if there was a possibility to get private investment to fund what would have been otherwise funded by the government on a capex basis, you should always go down that path without fail. Don't even think about it, because we know for a fact that governments don't have enough money. Every government runs in a deficit in India, right? So even at the central government, I think we are still in deficit. So if that is the case, then where is the question of thinking about whether to go in for PPP or not? I think what we find in India, so once again you have to see why is the central government so successful and state governments falter, right? Because central government picks up one sector, it does a lot of research and comes up with one project in which they will freeze all the documents, so bid documents, concession documents, they do a lot of back and forth with investors, with financiers, with the government agencies also, and then they'll freeze. And then they will keep on replicating that for every successive project. NHAI, why is it successful? It replicates the same process which may have been done. I think the model concession agreement was first frozen somewhere around in end of 1990, I think, end of 2000, early 2000s, I think, somewhere around that. So 25 years, same thing is being replicated, same processes. Of course, there must be tweaks here and there, but replication, right? Broadly replicated. Same thing for, I think, renewable energy also. 2011, I think the sector opened up. You are busy replicating the same thing. What happens is in the rest of the sectors which are not within the domain of the central government, the issue is we have lots and lots of states in India. We have lots and lots of union territories. Within those states and union territories, you have lots of cities, like you mentioned about Pune. Okay, that's one city in one Maharashtra state, but how many other cities are there? So now if you had to privatize water, get investment in water segment, water is controlled by the municipal authorities, right? So you'll go to a city like Pune, you'll go to Nashik, you'll go to Delhi, convince each and every one of those municipal corporations. Then those municipal corporations will come out with documents. They will probably take the trouble of talking to investors, talking to lenders and coming up with something like a bankable project or a well thought out project, and they will try to experiment. But just because, let's say, a particular municipal corporation has gone ahead and perfected a particular project doesn't mean that it will be followed by the other guy. In India, what we have seen is, and this extends even to the central government, by the way, you look at the documents for highways, you look at the documents for renewable energy, you look at the documents for ports, you look at the documents for airports, they are all different. They are not the same. So even within a particular government level, every department says, hey, I know better than the other because my sector is different, so my documents are different. So now if you now extrapolate it to the municipal authorities in India, I don't know if Rahul or Jagan, you know how many municipal authorities we have, but they must be running at least 1,000 plus, right? 1,000 agencies are now going to apply their mind separately on coming out with the documents, and why should they do it? Ultimately, why should they do it? Because what we are seeing is there is no push from the government also. So ideally what should be done in India is, hey, we are resource constrained, we don't have the money. If there is a possibility to get money from private sector, we'll go down the path. Here is the target for you. So central government will go to railways and say, sorry, here's the target for you, $5 billion coming from private investment. You have 2 years to do it. If you don't do it, here are the consequences for you. Then same for state governments, you go to municipal corporations and say, for water project, this is the investment target for you, and these are the consequences of not doing, and go down that path, become highly prescriptive, and relentlessly make people accountable for the execution of the targets which you set for them. That's what you have to do.
But that's what the government kind of envisioned with the national monetization pipeline and other such initiatives, didn't it? So why has it not worked out?
Because in India, see, what we have seen is there are two infrastructure asset classes. One is the infrastructure asset which exists already, and the one is new creation. What we've seen is it's very difficult to do something with something which is already built, because you run the risk that at a later date somebody can question you, what was the value of that which was already built by the government. And there are some very amazing arguments that you get, like once we were working on a project for one of the governments, and we got a letter from someone influential who said that, and I still remember the exact words. It was, you are robbing the future you're doing something to the future generations of India by doing this. And we asked them, hey sir, okay, fine. So what we are doing is we are privatizing an asset which you've already created. So what will theoretically happen is that government will realize the money that they had deployed. This money can potentially deployed into another asset. So what will happen in practice is, and we didn't write it, I thought in my mind that what will happen is the future generation who would have otherwise got one asset, now they'll have two, probably because of what we are doing. So, so what happens is very difficult to do something with what already exists, very difficult. But it's not so difficult at all to do something with something new. So if you had to create a new asset, new road, new port, new airport, new highway, you're not suffering from any legacy issues, and therefore it's very easy to do that. So probably what can be done in the sectors in which we do not have PPP, like water, waste management, railways, start with new asset creation. Forget about the existing ones. Say existing ones, okay, this remains within the domain of whichever government agency or government department is looking at this. Let's start with something new, where you are asking for some kind of a capex outlay from the government. Hey, we are not going to give it. We will go to the private sector and ask them to build it. And you go and manage it, sure. Maybe try that.
Right. So Rahul, I want to first, we also want to get to the execution part of the panel, and you have overseen a lot of execution of projects. So I want to throw two questions. One, just following up from what Kuljit said, in terms of, so much for the government in terms of to do with privatization, new asset creation. You have worked in the government. You could probably provide some perspective on what the other side of the argument remains in terms of new asset creation, why it probably not such an easy idea to replicate. But secondly on execution, there seem to be, for the lay person, there seems to be a very simple idea: corrupt bureaucrat, corrupt developer, corrupt everybody, bad project falls, disaster. This is the general chronology. The question is very simple. Is it that simple? Could you take us through what really goes on to an execution and why these things happen, or will they continue to happen?
So I think you've touched a very important point regarding the quality of execution. And I'll pick up from where I said about the DPR, etc. Fair enough. Now you come to the execution stage. So you've got presumably a good DPR, a good detailed design, etc. Everything good. You've even got a good executing agency. So I'm giving that you've got a good design, you've got a good executing agency, and now you want good execution at the ground level. So I think there are two key elements in my mind and our experience which is very important for good execution. And sometimes one is that you should not get blinded by that pressure of expeditious execution. Sometimes that bogey of expeditious execution sometimes blinds us. So to my mind, two key elements of good execution. And one is deployment of very good resources at the field for project management consultancy, what is known as colloquially as PMC. You need a very good entity at the field to just simply, in simple words, ensure that jo design hai, wahi ban raha hai. What is there in the good design is being executed by the good executing agency. So that is one. And second is, how can you best use technology, not technology for the sake of technology, but how can you best use technology for seeing and assessing the vulnerable spots. So these, to my mind, are very important elements. And again, I'll bring up a small point here, which is very interesting, and our experience in the last many such projects has shown us. Interestingly, when you fix up a project management consultancy entity, one thinking among most of the clients is that the entity which made the DPR cannot be a PMC entity because there is a conflict of interest. And I'm again repeating this. This is a thought process which has so many debates on that, and some entities, some clients have brought out policy document, and a DPR wala entity cannot be the PMC entity because there is a conflict of interest. And half the time it is reverse, and people who have realized it have reversed this, because when you get a PMC on spot, he'll spend the first few months saying that the DPR and design was completely wrong. He will reinvent the wheel, and you've lost again 6 to 10 months because of that. So most of the clients now are realizing this, and they have in fact reversed it and brought out policy documents and SOPs on that. So again, I'm touching a very important point, that this realization, I mean, I can understand there can be a conflict of interest between a DPR, PMC and the executing agency. But this logic that there can be a conflict of interest between a DPR entity and a PMC entity needs really to be questioned.
Jagan, I think Rahul spoken something interesting, that we have seen a trend where we have had record amounts of execution from government agencies, and sometimes perhaps expeditious execution is not the best idea in terms of looking at quality. How do you see that? Has a pursuit of this pace sort of allowed us to compromise on quality of the projects? Are they two related? Do you see that as that?
Well, we certainly know of one particular case. In fact, what Kuljit was talking about, the highways. We did a study with IIT Delhi on on elements of highway construction which affect the safety of movement of vehicles, or in the case of accidents, what happens. And IIT Delhi discovered on looking at a number of different documents that that corners were being cut in terms of the safety. We lost Mr. Cyrus Mistry, for instance, because of a badly constructed junction, along the highway, right? Now, that we know even, and it's admitted by people off the record, that yes, of course you have to cut corners because you have to build fast. The kinds of targets that NHAI was set for building the highways were pretty crazy targets. They have given us a huge network of highways, but not all the safety requirements as per the IRC codes have been complied with in that construction. So as a public trust, we do feel that it's also important to remind ourselves that while we need to build fast, we also need to build right. And that compromise will affect the future generations. So I think we do have issues with regard to what we end up doing, and I think the EPC mode of awarding contracts has its very big pluses, but it certainly has downsides, and we do need to have open conversations about what that does. It gives you things faster, but it does leave the option to cut corners with the agency that gets that contract.
Right. Kuljit, any final thoughts? Just to quickly wrap up what is in terms of how do we go about infrastructure for Viksit Bharat? Just to wrap up the session in terms of where do we see ourselves doing better in execution and getting funding, better funding?
I think you should be trying to open up newer sectors. I think that's one way forward, because highways and renewable energy is really doing exceptionally well. I think even some of the other sectors like ports, airports are also doing reasonably well. So just focus on the sectors where you haven't got private sector investment, and if you go after them, then you really increase the bouquet of projects which are available for private investment. But because today, as we see, actually Indian investors are sitting on a lot of money. You will see that in the stock market, but even in general, it's true. Corporates in India, if you look at their balance sheets in terms of the debt levels that they have or the liquidity that they have, they are very, very healthy as on date. And if there is a properly structured project for them, of course they will invest. Because, see, one of the things which has happened, and you touched upon it in your opening statement, if you ask people in general, what are the examples of PPP failures in India in the last few years? You will really struggle to answer that one. So if you are sitting on such a successful track record where people are having difficulty in identifying PPP failures now, so this is the best possible time to put more and more PPP projects into the market. So that would mean that you're already mining the renewable energy and highway sector to the extent possible. Mine all the other sectors which are there, because the demand is there from the investors. They are willing to put in the money.
Okay, I think that was all the time we had on the session. I thank our guests. I thank Kuljit, Rahul, Jagan. Thank you so much for your time and the valuable discussion.
Want access to Business Standards premium insights? Join our exclusive LinkedIn communities and connect with top voices in the BFSI space on topics that matter to you.